And so through our time going through the Exodus so far, we have seen the call of Moses that God gives to Moses on Mount Sinai, how Moses goes back. He's already interacted with Pharaoh once before. Pharaoh is not impressed whenever Moses throws the serpent down or the staff down and it becomes a serpent. I actually got on YouTube this past week and looked on YouTube for videos of magicians making staffs into serpents. Don't look those up in class because I know you will. But later after class, you can look those up on YouTube and they're kind of cool. But even magicians today can do that. Whether that's how they did or not, I don't know. But anyways, I thought it was interesting. But Pharaoh is not impressed. He does not let the people go. And so plague number 1 is actually interesting. The rest of the plagues, God is going to send Moses, and Moses is going to say, if you will let the people go, I won't do this. If you don't let them go, this is going to happen. The first plague is actually different because plague 1 is actually not given as an ultimatum to Pharaoh. God just tells Pharaoh this is what's going to happen, and then it does. And so let's look at that first plague together. And of course, that is turning the water into blood. Exodus chapter 7, verses 14 through 25. And we'll read that section together. Then the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is hardened. He refuses to let the people go. Go to Pharaoh in the morning as he is going out to the water. Stand on the bank of the Nile to meet him. And take in your hand the staff that turned into a serpent. And you shall say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, sent me to you, saying, let my people go, that they may serve me in the wilderness. But so far you have not obeyed. Thus says the Lord, by this you shall know that I am the Lord. Behold, with the staff that is in my hand, I will strike the water that is in the Nile, and it shall turn into blood. The fish in the Nile shall die, and the Nile will stink. And the Egyptians will grow weary of drinking water from the Nile. And the Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, take your staff and stretch it out over the head of the waters of Egypt, and over their rivers and canals, and their ponds, and all the ponds of water, so they may become blood, and there shall be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, even in vessels of wood and in vessels of stone. And we can stop there. And that's exactly what takes place. And so Moses and Aaron goes. The rest of the verses, 20 through 25, tells us they did exactly that. That Moses gave the revelation from God, and that Aaron took his hand out and put him over the waters of the Nile, and they did turn to blood. The fish did die, and that for 7 days that the people could not drink from the Nile River, the fish died and it started to stink. Now, one of the things it says in verses 20 through 25 is that the Egyptians were able to dig wells close to the Nile River in order for water. So it wasn't that there wasn't any water at all for 7 days, but it was a huge nuisance for them not to rely on the Nile River. Now, this would have been extremely frustrating for them. Because why? What does the Nile River signify in Egyptian culture? We talked about this a little bit in our introduction to the book of Exodus. Fertility, right? I mean, the fertility of the ground. The reason why the crops are able to grow is the annual floodings of the Nile River. You take that away, you take away their food, right? In some sense, that signifies fertility, the ability for the ground to reproduce, right? More than that, the Nile River itself is seen to be the imagery or embodiment of a god, right? I mean, that they worship the Nile. One of the reasons why we see time and time again Moses goes to Pharaoh, oftentimes in religious ceremonies, the pharaohs go to the Nile River, right, to ensure the good fortune of the people and for themselves. And so I think it's kind of interesting that the first plague actually attacks the most common imagery of divinity in the Egyptian mythology, right? That God is going to take their very source of life and their very source. I mean, we talked about this before. Once you get about a mile away from the Nile River, it turns into vast wilderness. So the vast majority of the Egyptians live relatively close to the Nile River. So this is going to affect the majority of the nation itself. It's not like, here where you've got the Duck River here, and you've got the Tennessee River and the Cumberland River and the Buffalo River, and you got all these rivers running around. It's not like that in Egypt, right? So everybody's centrally located on this Nile River. So this would have been something that would have been seen by everybody. And so the magicians are able to duplicate this. The question is, if all the water was turned to blood, how did the magicians duplicate this? Where would they have gotten the water?
They had dug a well.
Those wells mentioned in verses 20 through 25 that we didn't read together, those wells, the people were digging for water, they were able to take that and to duplicate that. Now, if we're talking about, if we go with the previous snake imagery being sleight of hand, it's not that hard to turn water red. We don't know what it was or how they did it, but we do know it did have an effect on Pharaoh, and that effect was no effect, really. It didn't. He was fine, right? 7 days go by, the Nile River goes back to its regular consistency of being water, and so Pharaoh's stubbornness, his hardness of heart, is there. It never changes. Comments on the first plague that we have here. One comment that I think is interesting, and that is the counterfeit, right? So far we have seen the Pharaoh's magicians able to counterfeit two of Moses' signs so far. And they've counterfeited what two signs? Obviously this one with the water turning to blood. What was the first one they were able to counterfeit? The serpents, right? And we talked about whether or not this power came from sleight of hand, from trickery, from Satan himself, whatever it is. We can't know definitively one way or the other. I think we may have some insight in a few plagues later as to what it is, and we'll get there in a second. But is there danger in counterfeiting today when it comes to God's signs? I think so, right? I think Satan is able to twist scriptures. I think Satan is able to take the message and the signs of God that God has given us, just like he had given to Moses to give to Pharaoh. And I think people today are magicians, and they twist things. And just like Pharaoh's heart was hardened by the duplication of the magicians, I think people today, their hearts are hardened whenever it comes to that. Obviously, different scenarios, of course, but I do think there is some sort of interesting parallel between Pharaoh's heart being hardened by the magicians counterfeiting what God had sent, and that being an issue in the religious world today. And so just something I thought was interesting. Any other things that you see from this text that's interesting? No? All right.
The fish, they all died. Like, I guess there were eggs or something, fish eggs that were still able to live through the blood and water.
Yeah, one of the things mentioned here is whether the word all means all the fish, or if the word used here in the Hebrew just means a large number, like a majority or a vast majority of all died. I don't know, but like you were saying, I'm not an aquatic I'm not a big marine biology type guy, so I don't know, Steve. That's a great question. About whether the fish eggs. I don't. The Nile is connected to the ocean, but then you've got the whole freshwater, saltwater, fish. Yeah. Except for bull sharks, they can go a couple hundred miles upland. And so think about that next time you get in the water, right? Brother Ricky.
Was this actual blood, or was it just the color of blood? I know it says blood.
Yeah.
The one in that day had a transfusion and bled because of the substance of the water, of the blood in the Nile.
So
obviously there's no way to know this, other than it says it's blood.
Yeah, so wonderful question, and to be honest with you, I don't know. The text says blood, so that's what I'm leaning towards, but could it have been something that was red and thick and had the consistency like blood? Honestly, I don't know. You'll find people who argue either way. It says blood. Obviously, Moses would have known what blood was, and it doesn't say it was, like blood. It just says turn it to blood. Now, you'll have people who will, argue that.
Distinct, I think it was blood.
Well, or did the distinct come from the dead fish that was floating in it? And so it's a good question, but somebody might say, well, maybe the stench came from the dead fish because the stench is mentioned right after the fish.
Well, they're trying to say on TV now that, they go.
It was red algae, yeah, it was a red algae, yeah. Yeah. And so I don't think it was red algae. I think it was a supernatural event. Now,
In 7 days, if it was clean for them to drink, because God had to be miraculous.
Yeah.
He did it.
Yeah. Well, it's like, you watch the History Channel specials, and it's like, well, this could have happened, and this could have, and the southeast wind comes. It's like, well, I believe that it all originated, continued, and evaporated, I'm not saying it all evaporated, but I'm saying like it came because God said it was going to come. It left because God wanted it to leave. Now, how it happened, I don't know, right? But if my God's big enough to create the universe in 7 days, He can make one river in the middle of Egypt blood for 7 days too.
There were other places in the Bible where wells were contaminated.
Yeah.
The fact that it doesn't say they were contaminated, it says it was blood. I'm kind of like Brother Ed, I believe it's blood.
Yeah.
Well, it says it turned to blood.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's I would say it was blood because that's what it says.
The Israelites would have suffered pretty badly from that plague too, wouldn't they?
Well, there's some rivers in Goshen.
But they all have names in the Nile, it's the Nile Delta.
Yeah. Well, it's a good question. We do know there's a differentiation between the later ones, but we don't know anything here, right? So that's good. And so they were able to dig wells close to the Nile that weren't contaminated. So, don't know. But we're not told that God makes a distinction until later on, and we'll see, but I believe it's in maybe the third or fourth one. Brother Mitchell?
I wonder what translation you use. I was looking for the word all in the fish, and in King James, I couldn't find this in the fish.
Yeah.
The water died. One way to think about it, God turned the water to blood, but if God can do that, He can certainly make it to where all the fish don't die through this event.
Yeah.
It's a miraculous thing, turning the water into blood itself. And there were later plagues where God would, spare the cattle of the Israelites, or God would cause it to rain, destroy most of the vegetation, but then He sends another one, and they're still eating more of it that's left. So, God is in control of all of this. So how He did it, and whether He killed all the fish, or whether there were, some that died and others that were spared. And like you said, our God is big enough He can bring it. He can certainly provide for and make sure there are fish after the event as well.
Right. I would agree with that. The ESV is what I was reading from.
The ESV?
That's right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Brother Ricky?
Is there any significance to the fact that we mentioned it was there for 7 days? Is this the only place that was actually a sign of a specific number of days?
The only one that I'm aware of. I believe so. I believe you're right. And this is the only one where we'll see moving forward where there are some that don't give us, some of the ones that we'll see here in a moment, Pharaoh asked, Moses for them to stop. Sometimes we're given that, sometimes we're not. But this is the one that we're told specifically lasted for 7 days. And so, why it was 7, I don't know. But we are told it was 7. And that's the only one we're told was God had designated a certain number of days. And then we're told what those days are. So good question.
Except the last one.
Well, we know, one night, yeah. So, good. Right? Good questions, all right? This is a picture of the Nile River. Imagine that being blood. And it's a very long river. It's one of the longest rivers in the world. So, pretty amazing stuff. The second one that we're going to see is the frog invasion. And I thought this would be like the next one. The third one. The Invasion of the Flies. I think it would be like an awesome punk rock band name. Invasion of the Flies. But anyways. So frog invasion. Let's look at chapter 8, verses 1 through 15. And we'll read that. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh and say to him, Thus says the Lord, let my people go that they may serve me. But if you refuse to let them go, behold, I will plague you and all your country with frogs. The Nile shall swarm with frogs that come up into your house, into your bedroom, on your bed, and to the houses of your servants and your people, and to the ovens and your kneading bowls. The frogs shall come up to you on all your people and all your servants. For the Lord said to Moses, Say to Aaron, Stretch out your hand and your staff over the rivers, the canals, the pools, and make frogs come up on the land of Egypt. So Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. But the magicians did the same by their secret arts, and made frogs come up of the land. And Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron and said, Plead with the Lord to take away the frogs from me and from my people, and I will let the people go to sacrifice to the Lord. Moses said to Pharaoh, Be pleased to command me when I'm to plead for you, for your servants and for your people, the frogs be cut off from you and your houses and be left in the Nile. And he said, Tomorrow. Moses said, Be as it is you say, that you may know there is no one like the Lord our God. The frogs shall go away from you and your house and your servants and your people, and they shall be left only in the Nile. So Moses and Aaron went out from Pharaoh, and Moses cried to the Lord about the frogs as he had agreed with Pharaoh. And the Lord did according to the word of Moses. The frogs died out in the houses, the courtyards, the fields, and they gathered them together in heaps, and the land stank. But when Pharaoh saw there was a respite, he hardened his heart. He would not listen to them as the Lord had said. And so here we have in verses 1 through 15, the frog invasion. And so God gives Pharaoh a warning and an option to let the people go, and Pharaoh declines. And one of the things that I failed to mention in the first part, one of the things you're going to see with every single plague, time and time again, is this idea that you will know that I am Yahweh, that I am the Lord. Why did God do this? Going all the way back to when God called Moses on Mount Sinai. Every single chapter, time and time again, you see this idea that these things are being done so the Israelites, but also Pharaoh and the Egyptians will know who Yahweh or the Lord is. And so you see that every time coming up. And it's important for us to remember the purpose of why these things are taking place.
Not just the Egyptians, it would be everybody.
Yeah, the Israelites, the Canaanites, right? Even the Canaanites, when the Israelites come in there, they know, right? They've heard about this people that God is with. So great point. Brother Ricky.
Do you have an idea how much time from the second plague and the third plague?
No, because it doesn't say.
The blood killed all the fish.
Right.
I think it also killed all the frogs and everything in the water. So did God create the frogs to allow this to happen after the blood was cleared?
It's a great question. It's hard to answer because we don't know the time that transpires. Also, once again, I don't know how long tadpoles take to develop, whether it's longer than 7 days or how that works. And then again, there's also lots of waters around the Nile, like those wells we were talking about the people dug. So it's a great question, and we would know more if we knew those details, but we just don't. It's fascinating to think about, but we just, is this 2 days after the blood clears up, or is this a week later or 2 weeks later? We just not giving that answer.
Well, they can live on frog legs for a long time.
Well, I mean, and going back to the miraculous thing, if God wants there to be, 15 million frogs out of thin air, I think God's got the power to do that, right? So, I mean, so that doesn't bother me as much as, it might some people. Yes, Miss Susan.
Well, I just had a senior moment and forgot where I was going.
That's okay. I must be a senior too, because I have those a lot myself.
I was thinking about God wanting His people to know Him, and He gave them a name. All the other people surrounding them were worshiping idols. Mm-hmm. And, He wanted to be different and better than He is. And I wondered if that didn't have something to do with His reasoning.
Yeah, I think so. I think it shows the power, right? You've got these lifeless gods who are being served, and God is the one taking the Nile River and turning it to blood for 7 days, or making frogs come up on the land. And so I think it is like you're just showing His awesome power compared to the other ones. The interesting thing is, just like the Nile represented a god for the Egyptians, so did frogs. The goddess Ikit, she was the goddess of, she protected women during childbirth. And so Egyptian women, when they were pregnant, would oftentimes wear necklaces of a frog around their neck while they were pregnant and when they gave birth, in order for the goddess to protect them during childbirth. And so, yes, John.
Seems like there might be some logic to his plan, I guess, more so mentally, because you were talking about how the Nile represented fertility, and then the frogs protecting the women during, what you were saying, pregnancy or childbirth.
Yeah.
It seems like there's some logic to his, you see what I'm saying?
No, it does, and it makes it even more interesting if you go back and think about the fact that Exodus actually begins by saying that God was with the Israelite women and their reproduction. The fact they were able to be so fertile and reproduce so quickly, right? And so, there's maybe some, what I'm saying? So at least that thread is at least interesting to think about from Exodus, 2 to what we're seeing here.
Seems like he's trying to more so make an underlying statement to the Egyptian people. These were your symbols of fertility and of
Well, even worshiping or using animals as imagery of the gods, very common in the ancient world, not just the Egyptians, but very common in Egyptian mythology. And so even later when we see the death of livestock, and a lot of those are going to be used as symbols for different types of gods. Todd.
Couple things. One, if you take this in consideration, and you take in consideration when the Philistines captured the Ark of the Covenant, and every time they put it in the temple, something happened to the guy, right?
Yeah.
It fell down before the Ark, it lost its hands and feet, and it was God has always used, basically showed, your God doesn't have power. I'm the true God. He's done that the whole time. The other thing is you talked about this, and with the frogs, it's more notable with the frogs than with the thing. The magicians could duplicate it, but they couldn't get rid of it.
I've actually got that in my notes, yeah. And so, just like, you're jumping the gun, Todd. No, but just like Todd said, right? And so, the magicians are able to duplicate this, right? That's our next point. But just like Todd said, when this is the first time we see Pharaoh bend, right? And it's only plague number 2. Who does he go to get rid of the frogs? Just like Todd said, he don't go to the magicians, right? He goes to Moses and Aaron and says, look guys, can you guys get rid of the frogs? I'll let you do whatever you want, right? And so can you plead with the Lord? And so here, Pharaoh recognizes Yahweh for the first time. And so Moses says, when do you want me to plead with you so you know the Lord did it, right? It's not circumstance. Pharaoh says tomorrow. So Moses goes and he pleads with the Lord, and the next day they die, right? And so it seems like Pharaoh wanted all the frogs to just hop back to the Nile River, and they don't. They die where they're at, and they have to be gathered up into heats. And when Pharaoh sees this and the stink of the land, his heart becomes hardened again, and he says, I'm not going to let you guys go anymore. And so his pride was affected, and the fact that he had to plead that God would take away the frogs die, and he sees that these stinking heaps, these foul stench upsets him. Any comments on number 2? Yes, Leroy.
Yeah, I always thought it was funny when Moses goes to him and he's like, hey man, when you want me to get rid of the frogs? And he's like, nah.
Tomorrow. Yeah. What a procrastinator, right?
I was like now, like yesterday.
Yeah. 10 minutes ago, Moses, get these things out of here.
Yeah.
He's like, they don't really bother me anymore. They're out of the palace now, so just wait till tomorrow. And so, yeah, it is kind of funny. I thought about that too.
I think it'd be the easiest one for the magicians to duplicate.
They're everywhere. Yeah. Right, here's a jar, some frogs. But no, you're right. And so, and going back, I think these magicians doing this is duplication, right? I think it is sleight of hand. I think it is, I don't think it's dark arts. But here are some imageries of Hekit, this goddess who has the head of a frog, who's supposed to protect women during childbirth. And so, there's something interesting. Susan.
Weren't the Israelites exempt from all of those things?
They're explicitly mentioned starting on this one, number 3. Now, whether they were affected in number 1 and 2, we're not told whether they were or not. But we do see a distinction given here with number 3. So good question. Let's look at verses 16 through 19. The Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, stretch out your staff and strike the dust of the earth so that it may become gnats in all the land of Egypt. And they did so. Aaron stretched out his hand with the staff, struck the dust. Number 18, the magicians tried by their secret arts to produce gnats, but they could not. So there were gnats on beast and man. The magicians said to Pharaoh, this is the finger of God. But Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen to them as the Lord had said. And so you have these gnats. And I've got the word kin there because kin is the Hebrew word here, and it's hard to translate because it could mean gnat, it could mean lice, it could mean maggot, and it could mean mosquito. And so we don't really know what it's representing. Either one of these 4 would be terrible when you think about there being a swarm, right? It's incredibly annoying, it's unpleasant the magicians for the first time cannot duplicate this act, and the magicians tell Pharaoh that this is the finger of God. And so the magicians, in my estimation, knew that their previous miracles were duplicates, and that this truly did have a divine origination that they could not duplicate. This is the finger of God. And so even they recognize that, okay, we can't do this. Right? We don't have anything in the trick bag to make this happen. And so, but unfortunately, it has no effect on Pharaoh. He's still stubborn. He's not going to let the people go. Questions or comments on the third plague?
It's interesting that they tried.
Yeah.
How did they try?
Yeah.
They just couldn't do it. Which tells you there's something we don't really know what existed prior to certain things and everything. But there's something about that. There's probably something more than sleight of hand.
Yeah.
Because if it was sleight of hand, they would be able to do it. Because you just go grab some glasses, slide them, and do a sleight of hand. This says that they're actually trying to conjure this thing. So we weren't back at that time. We don't know what God allowed.
No. Well, we don't know. Like, you could have somebody stand up and say, I think it was demonic powers. And I could say, I don't think it was. And who's right? I don't know. He thinks he's right, and I think I'm right. So it's kind of that stalemate. But you're right, we don't know, and it could have been, they could have went out, and so they could have went out with their staff and been hitting the ground, and saying, nothing's coming up, So it's hard to tell. Brother Ricky.
Now, the Pharaoh's bound to see the pattern here of what's going on. Okay, the plagues are getting worse each time. He's the most powerful man in the land. Why didn't he just take Moses and why?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know. Murder was extremely looked down upon in Egyptian society. It was seen, and so I don't know. They weren't as trigger happy as the Romans were historically, and so I don't know if that factors into what's going on, or I'm not sure. I don't know if maybe Pharaoh in the back of his mind sees these guys as having some sort of power, and so maybe he's afraid to be on the bad side of this Israelite God who can do these things, because in the ancient world, a spokesman carries the same respect as the person that he's speaking on the behalf of. And so, the representative of the president, even though he's not the president, you're expected to give him the same type of treatment as you would the president, because he is the president's official spokesman, or ambassador.
I feel sorry for that guy today.
Yeah, it's a little bit different today, right? Yeah, well, you're right. It's a little bit different. But in the ancient world, the messenger, of a king or of a dignitary or even a priest of a god was seen to have, special respect in certain aspects. And so, it's a good question. That may have something to do with it.
That's really true from beginning all the way through. That's why the Lord used that as a parable of the master sending servant after servant after servant, because they were a representative. Right.
By disrespecting the servant, then ultimately his son, right, was the ultimate disrespect to him, right? The sender. So good. Right? Good. Number 4, the invasion of the flies, my punk rock band name. Okay, and so number 4, the invasion of the flies. The Lord said to Moses, rise up early in the morning, present yourselves to Pharaoh as he goes out to the water, and say to him, thus saith the Lord, let my people go, so that they may serve me. Or else, if you will not let my people go, behold, I will send swarms of flies upon you, your servants and your people, and to your houses. Skip down to verse 25. Then Pharaoh called Moses, this is after the swarms come, and Aaron and said, go sacrifice to your God within the land. But Moses said, it would not be right to do so, for the offerings we shall sacrifice to the Lord our God is an abomination to the Egyptians. If we sacrifice abominable offerings to the Egyptians before to the Egyptians before their eyes, will they not stone us? We must go 3 days' journey into the wilderness and sacrifice to the Lord our God as he tells us. So Pharaoh said, I will let you go sacrifice to the Lord your God in the wilderness, only you must not go very far away. Plead for me. Then Moses said, Behold, I am going out from you, and I will plead with the Lord that the swarms of flies may depart from Pharaoh and his servants and from his people tomorrow. Only let not Pharaoh cheat again by not letting the people go to sacrifice to the Lord. So Moses went out from Pharaoh and prayed to the Lord. And the Lord did as Moses asked and removed the swarms of flies from Pharaoh, from his servants, from his people, and not one remained. But Pharaoh hardened his heart this time also and did not let the people go. And so this, number 4, is the first time where we are explicitly told that God makes a distinction between the Egyptians and the Israelites. That when these flies come, they're not going to affect the Egyptians. They're not going to go into the land of Goshen. They're not going to affect the Israelites. They're going to affect the Egyptians, but not the Israelites. And they're not going to go into the land of Goshen where the Israelites live. These are not flies like that pester you. These are likely not flies that pester you whenever you're having a picnic at the park. They're just annoying. These are likely gadflies or march flies, what we call horse flies. Anybody ever been bitten by a horse fly? Yeah, they bite, right? I had some pictures of like horsefly bites. I thought that's just too much, right? I mean, there was blood. Some cases there was like huge swelling. I mean, imagine having swarms of horseflies. You know, apocalyptic, God-sent swarms of horseflies. How bad would that be?
Do you think there was only one kind of flies? All the frogs being dead, there'd been flies there anyway, wouldn't it?
That's a good thing, but the horsefly was actually kind of feared in ancient Egypt. In ancient Egypt, they actually had a unit in their military that were actually called the golden flies, and they were basically because they called horseflies, what we call horseflies, golden flies, and they named a branch of their military after it because they were so aggressive and so, violent or whatever, and so. Probably these types of flies. Yes.
I've always wondered this. Whatever happened to the lice? They never asked God to take the lice away.
Yeah.
This says it takes the flies away. The lice, are they still around?
They didn't use the lice.
I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know. Maybe that's when the Egyptians started shaving all their hair. And culturally is what they did, right? So that's one of the reasons why the Romans, right? When the Roman legions are stationed in Egypt, the legions back in Rome make fun of the legions in Egypt because they start shaving their hair off their chests. They're like a bunch of girls, those guys in Egypt shaving their hair. Like literally, you can read this in the ancient text. Like they get really upset about that. I have no idea, right?
That word meant maggot. That's where the fly came from.
Maybe, maggots, lice, mosquitoes. So good question. Or comment more than a question. But this is the one, right? This is the one that breaks Pharaoh's back. Seemingly, right? Seemingly. And so Pharaoh goes, he tells Moses, he says, look, man, get these flies out of here, and you can go, you can make sacrifices to God right here. And what does Moses say? Yeah, says we're not going to do sacrifices here. Why?
It's going to be an abomination.
That's right.
The Egyptians may not get stoned.
That's right. And there are some reasons why that may have been an abomination to the Egyptians. 3 main reasons. Number 1, cattle could have been sacred. At different times in Egyptian mythology, cattle were sacred, and so the sacrificing of cattle could have been seen as an abomination. The sacrificing of sheep, we were already told that the Egyptians don't care for shepherds, and so maybe that was the abomination. Maybe they just weren't going to be happy that these Israelites are going to be making sacrifices to a foreign god. And so we don't know what is in view here, but either way, Moses says, no, that's not going to happen. We're going to go out in the wilderness. Pharaoh says, fine, whatever. And Moses says, all right, I'm going to let these flies go away, right? I'm going to tell God to take them away, but you better not, go back on your word again like you did previously. And what does Pharaoh do? Goes back on his word, right? And so Pharaoh agrees and then withdraws. The fifth one is the death of the livestock. We've just got a few minutes left, but let's go ahead and let's finish this out. Verses 1 through 7. You don't have to read that, but Moses goes back to Pharaoh and says, look, man, this is what's going to happen. All the Egyptian livestock in the field are going to die. And so the next day, all the livestock in the field die. Now, Pharaoh actually sends out men to go to the land of Goshen to see if this has affected the Israelites' livestock, and it hasn't. None of the Israelites' livestock have died, and yet the Egyptian livestock in the field have died. People have asked, what about later on where you've got the bulls and you've got the hail? You know, it says it kills the livestock. Well, from 5th to 6th, you know, what has happened to this livestock? Well, one of the things is it says all the Egyptian livestock in the field. That may mean that those in the barns didn't die. That's one suggestion. Another suggestion is God told the Israelites that when they left Egypt, they were going to plunder the Egyptians. Maybe that the Egyptians have to buy the livestock from the Israelites. There's all types of ways that may happen where we see livestock in later plagues. We just don't know what that is or how it comes about. But there are several ways how it could have come about. This is the first plague resulting in death. Right? The first 4 plagues are annoying. They're painful in some ways, especially if there are mosquitoes or gnats, if it is those horseflies. But this is the first time where death is caused by one of the plagues, and it will not be the last time. And so we're going to see there's going to be other plagues where people are going to die. It's also the first plague that endangers the livelihood and the property of the Egyptians. So things are getting serious, right? I mean, the plagues are getting worse and getting worse. In the ancient world, especially in Egypt, this is the largest civilization in the world at the time. You need animals. You need animals for your food. You need animals to work on your farms. I mean, think about from this aspect, you know, for those of you who have a farming background, let's say, you know, the gremlins, you know, destroy all farming machinery in the United States of America in one day, right? What happens?
Nothing.
Literally nothing, right? You know, people start going to the barns and getting old sickles that are like showpieces. Like, how does this thing work? Like, you gotta swing this way? Like, how does this, you know, like literally, like nothing happens. And so this is a huge, huge blow to the Egyptian economy. This is a huge blow to their livelihoods. And so major, major hit to their food and to their civilization as a whole. Once again, we see in Exodus 9, 1 through 7, that Pharaoh's heart remains hardened and he will not let the people go. A quick question so far. Questions, comments, considerations? Brother Ricky?
One thing I didn't mention about all the dead cattle, can you imagine how many buzzards were flying around?
Or the stench, right? I mean, like all these large animals. I mean, the text tells us it's donkeys, it's cows, it's sheep. I mean, imagine having to dispose of all these carcasses. I mean, that's a lot. I mean, that's a lot of dead animals. Jacob.
From the fish diet, there's so many places that even now that we count on fish as far as the economy of food.
Yeah.
Would that not have been an effect?
Food was one of the main staples of the Egyptian diet, and so yeah, it would have been a huge blow beforehand. What did I say?
Food was the main staple of the Egyptian diet.
Diet. Yeah.
Food is the main staple.
Oh yeah, well that makes sense. Okay, fish are one of the main staples of the Egyptian diet right back then, and so yeah, that would have hurt too. But especially if you take away the fish in the first plague and then livestock in this one too, and so.
I think Pharaoh started thinking about things a little bit differently now, and like the Israelites were, if he kept them, it was to his advantage. Because now they have livestock that he doesn't have, and obviously they're not being touched, so kind of, you know, like everything I do goes wrong.
Yeah.
Nothing happens to them, so they're my golden egg.
Well, yeah, well, I think you see, I think the pride. I think what we see here is the danger of Pharaoh's pride, because he's supposed to be, Pharaoh is the prophet of the Egyptian people. He speaks to the gods for the Egyptians. Like he's the link, right? He's the link that keeps the Egyptian people safe. And now all of a sudden, you have Pharaoh who's not able to keep his people safe or their stuff. And all of a sudden, these slaves over here their God keeps them safe. And so I think the big thing here is this pride. And Pharaoh, he goes from being God on earth. He is a representation of the gods. Like, think about the arrogance. Like, this guy's been groomed his entire life, and now the people are able to see. Jedediah's, which is a Hebrew name we don't get to later. Okay, Abraham. Abraham, Levi's, his cows didn't die. My cow. What are you doing, man? Because we don't think like that. But in the ancient world, it would have been looked at. Well, that's Pharaoh's fault. He's the one who's supposed to protect us, right? And so I think the pride is just blinding him. Good comment. John.
Going off what you were saying, do you think like if he would have gave up and let the Israelites go, do you think the Egyptian people maybe would have like rebelled against him for letting all this stuff happen to him, like you were saying?
Maybe. It's hard to say yes or no, but it's definitely a possibility. He is able to remain in power after the Israelites leave. So, but all right, Kevin, we get it, man. All right. All right, so some takeaways. God's awesome power. Oftentimes people try to find, explanations, the History Channel type stuff. Like, well, if it was like 170 degrees in April and there would have been a really bad year for red algae, maybe this could have happened and this could have happened and this could have happened. Yeah, at some point, walk by faith, not by sight. If it says it turned to blood, I've got no reason to doubt. God can create frogs. I mean, Joshua's long day, how does that work? The Bible says it happens, I believe it. Number 2, the danger of stubbornness. We look at Pharaoh and say, how could he have been so dumb and so stubborn? And if we're honest, I think we can look at our lives and the lives of most people at some point and think, how could we have been so dumb and so stubborn? And so it's really hard to throw stones at Pharaoh right here. But I think a lot of people have Pharaoh's problem with pride and not bending to God's will. And number 3, God keeps his covenants. So far we have seen Pharaoh go back twice on his word, and yet the entire purpose why these plagues are happening, God told Moses at Sinai, and then God, through Moses, told the people in Exodus chapter 4, I made a covenant with your forefathers. I keep my word. This is going to happen. And so, once again, God keeps his covenants with us. Obviously, that covenant today is that if we are in his Son and his blood cleanses us, that we will get to spend eternity in heaven. If we're not in his Son and his blood is not cleansing us, we will spend eternity in hell. God's a keeper of covenants, and that's a covenant we can take to the bank. Now, whether we are in Christ or outside of Christ, that covenant should either give us security or it should scare us into some water. One or the other, right? And so, great comments, great questions. I've already kept you 4 minutes over, and so I won't keep you any longer, but let's go ahead and let's close in a prayer. Thank you so much. Dear Heavenly Father, we're so thankful for your love for us. We're so thankful for the example that we see in your word. And dear Heavenly Father, we're so thankful for your awesome power and your love for us and sending your Son to die for us. Dear Heavenly Father, please help us not to be stubborn, but to have hearts that are malleable, that are able to look at you and to look at your word, that mold and shape our lives to be in tune with your will and with your word. And dear Heavenly Father, please help us to live our lives in such a way and where we honor the covenant that you have given to us through your Son, and help us to live in such a way where we can take other individuals who are still enslaved in sin and show them what freedom looks like in your Son. It's in his name that we pray. Amen.